So let the words of my lips and the thoughts of all our hearts be acceptable to you, Christ our Saviour.
Amen.
Now this is a bit where I normally say to you, please be seated, make yourselves comfortable. And I can see you're seated. I see some of you are nicely warm, coated and scarfed up to keep you warm. I had to smile when I saw the headline up there, Brian Ellis, peace. You know, because some people say I don't bring peace, I bring turbulence around. But that's another matter. We're coming towards the end of this first week of Advent. I'll return to that in a minute. You know, it's a long time since I had the opportunity to address more or less all the congregations of Broadway, Buckland, Buckland and Upway. Actually, the last time was what I called before Philip. It's when we had a service in St. Francis in Liverpool, before we'd actually got the formalities together of making this a new benefice. And somehow they said to me, Brian, do you mind talking? And I said, well, no, I'll always talk. And the heading of the sermon actually was differences are normal. Differences are normal. And so it is with us today, you know, differences are normal. We have different styles of worshiping, coming together before God. But you know, when you knit together those differences, we're almighty powerful. But that's an aside, really. Another aside was, I'm not going to talk about St. Nicholas. I made a quip before the service started when I saw an old icon that Judy and Philip were looking at. I said, oh, that's St. Nicholas. One thing about him, he knows how to grow a beard, doesn't he? Well, I'm not going to say any more about St. Nicholas. We see plenty of beards around. But you know the readings for today. We've got that wonderful prophet Isaiah. The Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He's anointed all of us to preach good news to the poor. It's a pity it's not married up with the gospel from Luke, isn't it? Because that's the very gospel that when Jesus was there in the temple, he unrolled the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, Luke 4. And that's the piece he read. And then he sat down. I call it the gobsmacking moment. Because he sat down and there was silence. Because that's the gospel in a nutshell. Isaiah and Luke 4. But before I even get into any more of that, the meat of the matter, or even perhaps to burst into song, I promise you I'm not going to do that this morning. I would just like to say what a joy it is to be with you all as a gathered congregation of Broadway, Upway, Bingham and Buckland. It's how we should be, united together in our worship. And something else. It's a pleasure to be with Philip, you know, leading our time together. Because sometimes as clergy, we've got something in common with ships. We just pass in the night. A quick phone call here or an email. We barely get time to be together and worship together. And something else about Philip. This is going to be his first Christmas with you. Good. Please look after him. He may have the care for all souls, but you know you've collectively got the care for Philip. And think of that in the weeks and year ahead as well. Don't always ask too much of him. He's not Superman. Look after him. Having mentioned Christmas, it seems to me to be a good marker to remind ourselves that we're in this season of waiting, the church's season of Advent. Now, sometimes you all know that I'm critical of the Church of England. I'm critical of rotas. This colour, that rule, this regulation. Why do we do it? I don't like rule books, you see. Certainly not rule books within the church. But on this occasion, I think they've got it about right. I applaud the symmetry of the church's thinking. Advent comprises 4 Sundays, 4 weeks during which we have the opportunity to consider and reflect upon 4 great themes which underpin our Christian faith, our Christian way of life: hope, peace, joy, love. Hope was the first. Did you sing "Come Thou Long Expected Jesus" every time? Hope, hope. What hope, even in the words of that song title, that first line? That's the first week. We're now entering the second week. Second Sunday of Advent. We turn our minds to peace. No dialogue between David over the emails this time about the things that were going up on the screen. We sometimes have that. But it was all there, wasn't it? Peace. We've been singing about peace, praying about peace. And yet, as we turn our minds to peace, Christ's peace, we so often use that word, peace. But are we certain that it's not merely a word we're using? What do we mean? We share the peace every time we come together at God's table in communion. We share the peace, an activity. Why do we do that? Is it simply an action within our liturgy that's grown up? I was taken aback when I was doing my training. They sent me on a 10-week placement to the darkest rural bits. And there I was one Sunday morning, and we shared the peace. And I did my thing of walking around and sharing the peace. And one fellow said to me, "No, I've already said to you good morning this morning. I'm not sharing the peace." Well, you find them all, don't you? But you see, the sharing of Christ's peace is much more than saying good morning. It's much more than that. We're in the touching place when we share Christ's peace, Christ's good news. We read and we speak of that peace of God, the words that have already been used this morning, the peace that passes all understanding. We proclaim the gospel of peace. Sometimes we refer to Christ as the Prince of Peace. Peace is at the very heart of God's mission. Blessed are the peacemakers. Jesus' words, which lead to the calling for all Christians to follow. Calling found in the words of the prayer of St. Francis, "Make me an instrument of your peace." And as we grasp that part of the calling to all who call themselves Christians, we maybe just slightly begin to understand a little more about peace. Peace, all peace, emanates from the presence of God, and our compassionate soul is the presence of God in the world. For we're surely called to reveal God in the world. We're called to follow God's will, meet with others as people of God, sharing the peace of God, breaking down barriers and walls, encouraging former enemies to come together. We can't do that just within these 4 walls. And there you are, you're sitting there shrugging your shoulders, quietly saying into your head, "Oh, it's not so easy as that." That's what you're thinking. You can always heckle it out if you like. How can I do that, sitting in here in a church in Weymouth? Well, stop just there. Think again. If God's peace is to break out, we need to always constantly remind ourselves that God turned the world upside down. He turns us inside out. Remember those words of Jesus again, John's Gospel. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you." Christ's gift of peace is for sharing, and we can share it wherever we may be. We need to have a renewed passion to share the peace of Christ. And when I was thinking about the theme for today, I went to my bookshelf. Some of my books are still packed up in boxes, but the ones I don't want to pack in boxes are still there. And you know, there's not a lot written about peace. The theologians duck it. They really do, they duck it. There's a book I mentioned to Philip before the service. It's got everything in it. You can go there, click the index, and you can find about who said this about faith, who said this about hope, joy, love. You look for the entry for peace, it doesn't even appear. These are theologians. The book is edited by the former Archbishop of Canterbury, by the way. So you need to research a bit about peace. So one book I didn't get packed, I brought with me. You see, I love the title of this, Rabble Rouser for Peace. Rabble Rouser for Peace. What a good title. What a wonderful man, by the way. Philip knows much more about this guy than I do. But if you wanted Advent summed up in the character of a man or a personality of man, hope, peace, joy, and love, take a look at Archbishop Tooton, the way he spoke to us, the way he presented himself. Rabble rouser for peace. And how our world needs us to be rabble rousers for peace. We live in a world where we can see violence all around, as people seek to pursue their own ends. The violence is not simply of bombs, bullets, bricks. It's also a violence of oppression, fear, intolerance. There's the violence of words being used in politics by so-called leaders, words of hate. There's the violence in business. There's the violence in domestic disputes, in our very homes, our very communities. And yes, sometimes shamefully, there's also violence in church affairs. One bishop against another, one congregation against another, one form of evangelism against another form of mission. That's violence. Aren't we united? Aren't differences good when they come together? We need to be rabble rousers for peace. And we all have an opportunity to point to a different way, to follow the transforming pathway of Christ. When we fall upon those who speak and write words of hate, we need to turn the tables. We do not resist evil with evil, but as the Apostle Paul put it in Romans 12, hold fast to that which is good, concluding at verse 21, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. In today's terms, we need to speak the words of compassion, tolerance, understanding, of unity. It means speaking and acting with generosity. It means joining with others who seek justice for the poor, the downtrodden, the oppressed. It means that we need to have a realistic awareness that merely debating whether war is right or wrong is not enough. We need an ethic that speaks out realistically. Peacemaking that actually does prevent war and achieve some justice. There's so much more that I could add to that particular topic, but that time prohibits me. Peace in God's kingdom really requires us to become reconciled first with God, accepting, recognizing our own errors, our own shortcomings, seeking forgiveness. You know, the liturgy's right early on when we come to worship. Almost the first thing we do is to seek forgiveness. Recognize that we don't always get it right ourselves. And when we become reconciled with God, We then seek to become reconciled with others, other people, with the rest of humanity, if necessary, by non-violent direct action, as we have witnessed down the ages. For example, in the actions of Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and others, well-known figures of history, but also those less well-known. We all know Lech Wałęsa's name, but what about the ordinary workers in the solidarity movement in Poland? And the wonderful revolution, the revolution of candles in East Germany, toppled the Berlin Wall. No famous people there, the revolution of candles that ended the oppression, the dictatorship in East Germany. Those are the things that can be done. Peace can and will break out in surprising places and in surprising ways. If only we allow God's peace to enter our total being, make us real instruments of God's peace. For as I said earlier, all peace emanates from the presence of God, and our compassionate soul is the presence of God in the world. Let us be instruments of God's peace, rabble-rousers for peace here in Weymouth. When we do it, have no fear, for God is with us in all that we do. In the name of Christ. Amen. Just bow your heads. Prayer. Prayer of peace for the sake of God. We are the incarnation. We are the hands and feet of God, are the hope of the world. We are in God and God is in us. God who dwells in us can speak our words if we allow it. God who believes in us can work through us if we permit it. We receive the peace of God, not the external peace of the world, but the peace that calms the storm in our hearts and pacifies the warfare in our mind. Let all that we think, all that we feel, all that we do be for the sake of God. Amen.